All right. Thank you so much, Larry, for that great soundtrack. Appreciate it. We're still letting people into the room, but we're going to go ahead and get started because it's already 2:35. So welcome, welcome, welcome once again to another session of the WBL Institute. It's March 3rd, and today's topic is supporting diverse learners in the workplace. So we have so much in store, a very packed agenda, as well as slides that are chock full of additional information and links. So we're really, really excited that you're here. And we again thank you for taking time after your regular classes to come and join us. Moving to the next slide. We just want to remind you that the WBL Institute calendar is up. We have at least 3 more sessions to go before the end of this particular course. So please go to this landing page and register for upcoming sessions. We will be launching another calendar in April so that you can finish out the school year with additional support. So that's going to be coming soon. But if you are still not sure of how to register, we definitely hope that at least you know that this is the landing page. So just a reminder, and feel free to pass along the message to colleagues who haven't been able to make it just yet. Moving to the next slide. Again, establishing the meeting norms. These hold true every time we meet. We want to make sure that we all participate in the session because hopefully you're here because you want the information and we want you to be able to digest it and take it back to your schools. We want to be able to have everyone fully commit to being present when you're here. Even if your camera is off, we do hope that you will be engaging in the chat or speaking up live. And of course, if there are Q&A sessions or breakouts, we definitely would want to hear your voice at that time. And then last, we do really encourage everyone to complete the exit survey. If not before you leave, then directly after, so you don't forget anything, that it's fresh in your mind. We use all of your feedback, and we want to make sure that whatever you need, we can continue to follow up with you if there are additional items after the workshop that you're interested in receiving. So moving to the next slide. I want to be able to introduce our speakers for today. Of course, myself, Takia Weeks, and Larry Fleming Williams are going to be doing the support as always. If we're not presenting, we're in the background. And then we have 2 members of additional divisions here with us today. So we have Jasenia Crespo, Director of Career Readiness from DML, and then we have Audrey Mangan, basically instructional lead from TCAC. Both of them have presented here before. You guys already expect a level of quality from them. And so I want to pass the baton over to Jasenia and Audrey.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just to norm ourselves and continue with Takia's wonderful introduction. In terms of our next slide, please, has to do with outcomes. We want to share with you different ways learning styles that everyone has, and also learn different reasonable accommodations and considerations, scaffolds for English language learners and students with disabilities in the workplace. And we'd also like for you to develop reasonable accommodations based on student learning styles for yourselves. We want you to continue the incredible work that you're already doing with your work-based learning partners. And we're here to support you developing and sustaining those effective partnerships and remove some of the challenges for them. And this session will focus on best practices and strategies for building effective partnerships while meeting the needs of your English language learners and students with IEPs at your school. Next slide, please. So for the TCAC, you know that what we do is we provide support for students with disabilities around the areas of transition. And we know a huge part of transition is employment, and that encompasses work-based learning. And we provide those work-based learning opportunities to students and schools. And we are so happy to further develop resources such as this presentation today. Next slide, please.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Audrey. So with that, just wanting to introduce again who we are as the Division of Multilingual Learners. Our vision is that all New York City DOE's culturally and linguistically diverse students will graduate multilingual, multiliterate, and prepared to succeed in college, career, and life in a global society. And we intend to achieve this through our strategic focus areas that include college and career readiness for every Mel and L. If you can transition, Larry, that would be great. Yep. And if you could transition again, we'll see that we also have rigorous instruction across disciplines for MELs and Ls. And we also have a coherent system-wide process for supporting L's program design and implementation, and increased family empowerment and community partnership. And the highlighted or the orange bubble there is specifically the post-secondary readiness team within DML, which I serve on, which is really focused on thinking about college and career readiness for our multilingual learners and English language learners. And when thinking about CTE in particular, really thinking about increasing access to CTE completion and work-based learning opportunities. So again, as Audrey mentioned, we're definitely both teams are here to support you in increasing access and equity to your Ls and students with disabilities. Next slide. So before we dive into content, we wanted to take some time to kind of get an understanding or discuss learning preferences on the work experiences. So today's presentation is going to be, we're going to ask you guys a lot for your opinion and to enter them into the chat. So if you don't mind, and we'll give you some thinking time, but drop into the chat your name, your school, your role. We always want to hear who's in the room. And also, how has your preference approach to learning influenced your work experiences? And what are some considerations employers should implement when working with English language learners and students with IEPs? So we'll give you some thinking time just to put into the chat. And I know, Audrey, we'll give folks time, but I know you have some experience with like your learning preference.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've got Rihanna's work going on in the back to keep us focused on the work. Yes, that's right, Omari. Laugh at me. It's good. In terms of my own learning style, we're going to share a resource with you, but I took the resource myself, and my learning style came out as it was a real mixture. Quite a bit was visual, and 25% for auditory and our auditory and kinesthetic. And kinesthetic, I was very surprised at, considering movement may not be my thing. However, it was an important way in me to understand how I learn. And then when I'm thinking about how I work, it's very interesting. Oh, look at this, majority visual learner. Thank you, Boatswain. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, thank you, Patricia. The employer should consider student learning needs and provide training. Great, visual, tactile. Thank you, Maria. Lovely, lovely. Visual learner. Yes, yes, fantastic. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, I love all of these responses. And folks, the reason why we're also asking you to put it into the chat is because we're going to share out the chat at the end. So you'll be able to see everyone's responses throughout the session, as well as the strategies that they're using. So please, 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 we really, we're experts, but you're also experts in the room, and we really want to uplift your voices in the space, whether it's through the chat or unmuting yourself. So thank you for sharing. I saw a lot of great things. I'm also a visual learner. So for me, I 100% visual learner, I would say, even though I have not taken the test. So I'm going to do that after the session. But my assumption is that I'm a visual
take the test to see for yourself but I think in the chat was mentioned under COVID, right? Another layer, but thank you so much. That was great. Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Next slide, please. So some of you already alluded to kind of the different learning styles, but we're going to give you a quick summary and some strategies for each learning style. We're going to start off with visual. As we know, visual learners process information best when it's presented with images, drawings on a whiteboard, charts, graphics, diagrams, maps, or other graphics. Visual learners usually process pictures before they read print and text and are able to visualize concepts quickly. People who are visual learners prefer when instructions are printed rather than given verbally, and may often scribble or doodle when conceptualizing or attempting to make sense of a new topic. Many visual learners remember sometimes better that they like to write things down or draw it out, also tend to organize or visually compartmentalize information as it helps them learn new concepts and ideas. For the auditory, people who process best when it's said out loud, such as in a lecture setting or a spoken presentation, such as this one, these types of learners can easily recall what others say and prefer to talk through topics they find complex or difficult to understand. People who have this learning style prefer verbal directions and may use repetition or repeat things aloud to commit them to memory. They may ask multiple questions to understand the subject matter better and may need to hear something repeated more than once before fully comprehending. They work well in group. I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted with all the other noise happening in my background. They work well in group settings and appreciate team discussions, and their learners also benefit from listening to recordings, so like if pre-recorded sessions, as a method of absorbing new concepts. And then finally, the kinesthetic learners process information through experiences rather than being shown or told. So this is like your hands-on learner, and they prefer to touch and feel items and can easily recall things they've done versus what they've heard or read. People who have this form of learning like to make things and create things using their hands and remember information best when they are physically involved. They may stand up and move around or act out information to remember it. These learners also like to participate in a process by shadowing or assisting and prefer to practice or rehearse concepts as a way to absorb new information. Next slide.
So for our visual learning style strategies, what we've done for you here is we've put all of these potential suggestions you could give to employers for students, and we know that we all have a different type of learning style. So these are really applicable to all of our learners. However, at the end of the presentation, you will receive all of these different strategies so you can use. So for our visual learners, it's processed best with images, graphs, it could be video as well. And then the visual learners like the information printed because their preference is not through audio, and you could have processing issues. But many visual learners can remember different pieces of information if they've written it down already. So as I'm going through this, if you'd like to drop in the chat how you communicate to your students, like when you're connecting with your work partners, do you have any strategies that you use to tell your work partners, oh, don't forget, generally students from my school like to learn in this way or that way. If you have some examples and you'd like to drop it in the chat, that would be lovely and much appreciated. So the students really do enjoy looking at the images, looking at each other, working together to figure different aspects of the task out. And then for those visual learners, some of the strategies to people can engage with is letting the visual learners know, write down information that you feel is important, and then we can meet later to see if you did indeed get the main ideas. Having those students use highlighters with different notes to see the information in a different way, using graphs and charts, diagrams. So all of these different pieces are very, very good for those learners. When we move on to the auditory style, providing those verbal directives. Now, one of the pieces that this should you can make a connection to is how different accommodations on the IEP, let's say testing accommodations, guess what? Directions read and reread for those audio learners. Breaking down the instructions to step-by-step list, encouraging can we change the slide? Thank you so much. My apologies, Larry. I am just raring and ready to go.
Actually, Audrey, I just want to uplift before we move on to the next learning style.
Yeah.
Just really want to uplift. Joyce threw into the chat that she makes phone calls and emails worksite partners for each student individually, which I wanted to really, thank her for uplifting that into the chat, but also bringing that into the larger space as a great strategy in order to ensure that your workplace partners are supporting the needs of your students.
Yes, absolutely. And we really want to thank the dedication of the work-based learners for engaging in this process. And Jay Lee from 26Q, what's nice is we included a learning style questionnaire that your students can engage in. It's pretty quick, and it does a nice job of delineating the information. So auditory learners would benefit from hearing the information again, repeating instructions. If you have a meeting, can it be recorded so the students can play it again? And some students really love background music while they're engaging in certain tasks, and you as the instructor would have that flexibility to do that. And some of them don't like that, and guess what? There's earphones. So all of these different pieces can be part of what they're engaging with. Next slide, please. So for the kinesthetic learning style strategies, for me, this really speaks to the heart of the hard trades, where students get to build up that particular muscle memory as they're working with different tools, as they're doing, whoever this person is can just wait. Too bad, my apologies. So the kinesthetic learner can really engage in the physicality of the process and learn from each other, and they can learn how to engage with that hands-on learning and take notes on what works well for them and how it is that they can use the physical space to. Sometimes the kinesthetic learner does need a physical break, and that may mean just taking a quick walk. And you've heard it yourself many times on the workplace where people say, oh my God, I got to take a walk. I got to go get a coffee. I got to do something other than sit here right now, but I'll be back. So we do have the kinesthetic learning styles, and also you see it all the time in the workplace, the standing desk, right? As well, or people who choose to sit on the exercise ball. So it's very interesting how the different accommodations have become very commonplace, which is wonderful for students. Next slide, please.
So we wanted to definitely take the opportunity to, one, acknowledge the importance of learning styles in supporting not only students in like their work experiences or their WBL experiences, but also acknowledging that there's more than one assessment that can be used. There are other learning styles, there's personality tests, there's leadership assessments, and it's a matter of the tool that you've identified that you want to utilize and leverage for your students and your community. But just like overall, we provided here a list of a variety of different tools. I am uplifting 16 personalities as a great tool, for example, because it is for your ELs. It's available in multiple languages. Also, like the Career One-Stop tool, whether it's the values or the skills assessment, it's also available in not only in English, but also in Spanish. So we've provided here a variety of tools that you can leverage on your own time, both paper and online accessibility. Biggest thing about to think about or to consider when working with your ELs is whatever assessment you do decide to use, just ensuring that it's enabled with Google Translate. So that way, if students do prefer to read content or information in their home language, they have access to, even if it's using an online platform. And just like thinking about the importance of learning styles that just give tremendous advantages and increase productivity, it's just something that we wanted to keep top of mind. So again, these are some of the other approaches that you can use for your students. Next slide. So I have here something that I wanted to share, which is really considering shifting pedagogy to support students rather than shifting students learning. It's shifting as individuals. So we have here scaffolding instruction for MELs and ELs. The content in this resource is basically a summary, but what you can do, and you'll have access to it, but what you'll realize is that a lot of the supported or the suggested supports actually align very and correlate very nicely to the learning styles and some of the best practices and strategies that have been uplifted there. This is a resource that you can utilize, and you can feel free to even share it with work sites or your WBL partners and see how they can utilize this. And if you transition, Larry, you'll be able to see that this document is a little bit more detailed. So this is like the summary one, but if you transition one more time, we have a document that goes into the content a little bit deeper and not only provides like the supported suggestions, but also then shows you how to implement them. So I think that's the key part. It's not only about like what are the suggested supports, but how to implement them. And you'll see here some examples of how to be able to do that. So again, on your own time, you'll be able to have access to this resource, actually both resources, the summary and the more detailed version for you to be able to leverage and think about as you're thinking about your students' different learning styles. Next slide. So now that we've talked a lot about learning styles and provided a couple of different tools for you to leverage and use when thinking about your students and their learning styles, really wanted to center this thinking about supporting diverse learners in thinking about this federal law. So thinking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and specifically wanting to focus, which we'll talk a little bit more about disability in this section, but really wanting to ground around Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972, which is really important. And I just want to preface that not only is it important for our employers to clearly know about, but it's important for our students to be knowledgeable of their own rights as students and students who are in the workplace and will be in the workplace. And thinking about this law makes it illegal to discriminate against someone based on color, based on race, religion, national orientation, or sex. It also makes it illegal to retaliate against anyone who makes a complaint about discrimination or who filed a charge on discrimination or who participated in an employment discrimination investigation or lawsuit. And it also really makes this the concept of thinking about the employer or the employee rather. The law also requires that employers provide reasonable accommodations for applicants and employees to hold religious practices unless doing so will impose hardship to the business, to the employer's business. But just something that we really want to ground on. And I think that Audrey had some also additional talking points, which were really great in thinking about how to center this for our students.
Thank you so much, Yesenia. This is very much the subject matter of U.S. history. And if everyone could turn off their microphones for a moment or mute themselves, thank you. This is very much a part of U.S. history. This is the most important part of U.S. history, where we have the different groups in the United States gaining political power, gaining leverage, gaining the rights that should have been in place all along, and for fair and equal treatment in all arenas of life in the United States. So this is really vitally important, and we have to acknowledge the struggle of all of our different groups within the United States, and thank them for everyone doing our part in making our society the way, moving us along on the continuum to be a more open and justice-based society. But we also want to think about where for our students, right? Many of our young people are going to be our future small business owners. They need this information very much so. And Larry, if you could turn to the next slide, please. When we think about the Americans with Disability Act, the Americans with Disability Act is very clear that as of that went into effect in 1990, as you can see, the continuum over time. Most definitely, Joyce, thank you so much. And we'll get to that. That's in this presentation. The Americans with Disability Act did say that you can't also judge people based on disability as well. Absolutely. So we are all on a continuum, and we appreciate what the different groups are bringing forth to participate in the workforce and really assist our country's growth. Absolutely. So the ADA is where it's illegal to discriminate against people with disabilities. And as Joyce, I believe, pointed it out, physical disabilities, you see things everywhere that help all people. I know myself, I search for that curb cut as I'm walking down the street because I'm too lazy to go the other route, but it's there and it helps everyone. Universal door handle. So if you can open the door, but if your hands are tied with a bunch of other things, you can just lean in on it. So all of these small things move us towards more access and movement within society. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about the Americans with Disability Act, the Title I says that private employers, state and local governments, employment agencies, and labor unions cannot discriminate against qualified individuals with disabilities. So when you're thinking about that, would you be so kind as to, if you could answer in the chat, how does that Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act impact your relationships with the work-based learning sites? And while you're entering that into the chat, I'll give a small anecdote where a person from the DOE came back to the TCAC and said, we are having problems with this potential employer. They said they kind of don't really want to work with students with disabilities. And we said, okay, great. Call them right back and say, oh, I must have misunderstood our conversation because you would never, ever discriminate against young people or any people with disabilities, right? I must have gotten it wrong. Of course you wouldn't. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we do have to recognize that these aspects are out there. and we want to keep moving all the relationships forward. And if businesses need help in this area, the TCAC can run presentations for them and provide support. And you've already got all that information in the resource guide. So let's take 1 second and look at, thank you, Raphael. It is definitely something they should all be aligned with. And I'm just going to take a quick peek at the chat. Yes, the students with wheelchairs, the students who have visual impairments, absolutely. Thank you, Madeline. All work-based learning sites are aware. Beautiful, fantastic. That is great. All right, lovely, lovely. Next slide, please. The other piece that we want to highlight, especially for our young people, is that a disability can be, it could be a physical, it could be a mental impairment, but a person can develop a disability at any time. Anyone can have a health issue. Under the pandemic, many reasonable accommodations were filed because of disability related to the COVID-19. But students need to understand that if they're small business owner, one of their employees could ask for a reasonable accommodation that they didn't need the day before. So it's something to be aware of, and a disability can be temporary or it can be permanent. And the area that, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. So for types of disabilities, we've got a general listing here. Not all disabilities are something you can see. Some disabilities just look like everybody else. But according to the ADA, 1 out of every 5 people who are employed in the United States of America has a disability. 1 out of 5 students, 20% of our students have IEPs. So when we're thinking about our daily lives, can we, as educated adult teachers, we're all certified, can we look around the room and pick out everyone with a disability? I don't think so. So we really have to be mindful and be respectful and keep the work moving forward. And of course, mental health is the disability that is really coming to the forefront, and I'm so glad that we're addressing a lot of those concerns. Next slide, please. So in terms of some reasonable accommodations, what we've got here are examples and some of the different reasonable accommodations that work-based learning coordinators can share with the student to disclose to or to ask of their potential employers. And accommodations are to remove barriers for the student to have equal access to learning and work-based learning, emphasis on the learning. Accommodations, they're not changing the activity that the student is engaging with, it's engaging the how part of the activity. So if the student has to handwrite notes during a meeting, they have the option of utilizing technology. If the student is having trouble with mental computations, they can pull out their phone and use the calculator function. So these would be some of the pieces. Next slide, please, Larry. You may, if you have a student who is part of the deaf community, they are entitled to a deaf sign language or a sign language interpreter for the job interviews. An employee with diabetes can ask for breaks during the workday to eat and monitor their blood sugar and insulin levels. Employee who is visually impaired may need someone to read information for them posted on a bulletin board. And an employee with cancer can ask for certain leaves and leave time to engage in radiation or chemotherapy treatments. And we know all people can get an illness such as cancer. So these would be just a general listing. And of course, we share all of these with you at the end of the meeting. The next slide, please.
Before we transition, there was a question in the chat from Maureen, and I actually am interested to hear. I have a suggestion, but before putting out my ideas, I'm really interested in hearing from the community of other CTE learning coordinators, WBL coordinators, other staff, but really thinking about, so the question was around, information such as revealing that a student has an IEP is privileged and you're not allowed to share. Very similar with the students who are learning English, that's privileged information. Is the best place to highlight student modification or to identify strategies to best support them in their training plan. So I'm really interested to hear how other folks currently engage in sharing this information. I know earlier someone had mentioned in thinking about the learning styles that they personally pick up the phone and call people and send individual emails to all the work-based learning sites. But I'm also wondering what other strategies are folks using and if they can really uplift them in the chat. That would be great before jumping in, before transitioning. And Audrey, if you have any best practices for transitioning to talk about L.
Thank you. Yes, yes. One of the pieces that we work on as the TCAC for interacting with potential employers is we offer training for students with disabilities to start to engage in disability disclosure, because if they're experiencing a concern at the work site, the person who can share their request for reasonable accommodations is the student. Now that's a student-facing training that the TCAC can offer in your schools for your students. And that would be an option that the student has to discuss with their employer directly to see what reasonable accommodations can support them in the job. But that piece of the students interaction with the employer, that comes from the students. And right now, when we're thinking about the 3 domains of transition, employment, education, and independent living, when our students leave us, they are leaving the nest of support from the high schools, and they will have to engage in these independent activities to see if they can be entitled to different things such as reasonable accommodations, or eligible, excuse me, because while they're in high school and they're in the school setting, they're entitled to services. Once they leave high school, they're eligible in the adult world for services, but only if they ask. If they don't ask, it is perfectly reasonable for the employer to assume that this person has no disability, they have no other questions or concerns, they're just not right for this job, and they'll be dismissed after due process. So the students, we have to encourage them to be able to speak up, and that's why getting them to understand those reasonable accommodations and their rights, but there's also responsibilities that the students have to do to keep themselves moving along on their employment continuum.
Definitely thinking about those self-advocacy skills, right?
Yes. Yes, yes, and being able to speak up for yourself and being able to engage in, quite frankly, what may be a difficult conversation, but students should be presenting at their IEPs. They should be familiar with their disability. They should be able to speak to their strengths and areas of growth, and that all falls under self-advocacy. Thank you, Yesenia.
Yeah, no worries. I also think that at least for English language learners, in thinking particularly, I definitely do think the training plan is a good place to start, given that it is a resource that is signed by both the student and the employer, and also something that is reviewed and is used by the school. So including not necessarily, to your point, not privileged information, but if there's a learning style or a strategy that is best for that student, I definitely think that the training plan is a great resource that you can leverage. So with that, we'll talk a little bit more about L's in particular, and just wanting to uplift. So going back to sharing the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1972 that says discrimination against someone on the basis of religion, color, race, national origin, and sex is illegal. Just wanting to uplift, which is a little bit different than, students with disabilities. Students with disabilities, as Audrey mentioned, like they're eligible for services upon graduating high school. So like thinking about in college and in the workplace, they're eligible for that versus students who are English language learners. If you transition, Larry, English language learners actually doesn't follow that status does not follow them in college or in the workplace. So whether a student is taking career or college, they're no longer considered an English language learner outside of our system. So I just want to mention, like, first of all, just norm as to what is an English language learner, but also uplift that 40% of New York City DOE students have a primary home language other than English. So even if a student is not an English language learner within New York City in particular, and I'm sure everyone knows this, but just reinforcing like racial, linguistic, and cultural identities of our students, they definitely are coming with multiple assets, and not just English as their only language, but are also coming with other languages, sometimes more than 2 languages that they may be speaking at home. So something that I really wanted to uplift, and then just acknowledging that of that 40%, 13% are English language learners. And it's really important to have an understanding that an English language learner is defined or identified or classified as someone whose home language is not English and needs support learning English. So again, once they leave the DOE system and when they're in college and also when they're in the workplace, they're no longer considered English language learner, or that's no longer a classification or an identity that follows them. Instead, it's like really important, which Audrey mentioned earlier, is to really emphasize how students can use their self-advocacy skills and how their linguistic skills makes them much more effective employees due to their abilities, and ensure that students are able to articulate sort of the benefits of being able to speak multiple languages and come from multiple cultures and be racially diverse, and being very important to the process of the workplace and the diversity that they then bring into the workplace, which we will talk about in 2 weeks. On the 17th, there will be a session, multilingualism and multiculturalism in the workplace, and we'll dive a little bit more about some of those benefits of being an English language learner as well as being multiculturalism in the workplace, but definitely something that it's important to uplift in this space as we're thinking about supporting diverse learners and ensuring that our employers or our work-based learning partners really understand the landscape of who our English language learners are in the system. Next slide. So as Audrey had mentioned, there are accommodations and modifications to be made for students with disabilities. We don't use, at DML, Division of Multilingual Learners, we do not use accommodations. Instead, we use considerations and scaffolds for L's as the language. Conceptually, it's very similar, but just we do not use accommodations. And I just wanted to make that very clear, just how we separated kind of the supports for accommodations for students with disabilities versus considerations and scaffolds for L's. And wanting to uplift that scaffolds are techniques used to increase access to and engage with high-level content in the learning process. And the concept really shifts learning to meet the needs of the learner. And we're providing 2 examples here, which you can feel free to share as well and use this deck to have conversations with your work-based learning employers or partners. And the example one for ELs is like if an EL participates in a work-based learning experience, proactively provide structured student reflection with graphic organizers before, during, or after the experience to help students make connections to classroom learning and work experiences. It might not be the way students process information. It might require them to actually, like we learned the learning styles. They might need to take notes and, think about these in a micro learning setting where it's like shorter intervals of learning in order for them to make that longer term connection between classroom learning and the workplace. So that is a scaffold and even something that your like an internship site person can, a work site or employer can actually do and preload or front load some of the information that the students might be engaging in ahead of time. Another example is when onboarding and thinking about onboarding new interns. So I'm currently working with 3 interns, and through my process of functioning as a worksite supervisor, I've learned through the onboarding process that it's, our ELs, they may need additional time. And some of that additional time includes like structures for support, such as literally I was meeting with the students 4 times a week, and it was recommended only 2 times a week. So I was literally checking in with them every day, but it was that idea of front loading some of the resources and information and ensuring that I am adjusting my leadership and my work style to meet their needs, right? And I learned that very quickly. And I made many errors in working with the students, and that's normal, right? That is very normal. It's just a matter of how do you then take that information and learn from that. So, I had ended up doing more one-on-ones with the students to provide them additional support. I created an ongoing agenda with detailed next steps, which you'll have access to several of the links here, and utilize a task log so they can track their own assignments and whether they were completed or not. But these are some of the systems and structures that needed to be put in place and that are very important for you to uplift to employers, whether it's on a phone call or via email, or just embedding it in their training plan as additional tips and strategies to support student learning. It's definitely something that I would highly encourage and recommend. Next slide.
So when we're looking at the our students, our ELs, our students with IEPs, how we pose the question to you, esteemed group members, how do you, as the work-based learning coordinator, provide support for your business partners, for your school? What would be some new things you might think about providing for them after today's presentation? So if you could take a moment and enter some of the concepts, either you heard it from colleagues or you saw it here today in the presentation. What are some things you'd like to bring back to your school that you could potentially implement the next time you have a business meeting with a partner? So we'll go back to Rihanna. Work.
Yeah, or folks can also unmute themselves if they want to take time to hear more.
Absolutely. Very nice, sharing students' learning styles. Thank you. And one of the things I wanted to share in terms of ELs was a beautiful lesson that I saw at Boatswain School was when it was a HVAC class and students had to learn their tool identification in English, but if they spoke another language, the expectation was either I'll tell you what this tool is in this language, or you're going to look it up. So this way, when you get interviewed, if you say you speak Arabic, guess what? You can have this whole conversation in Arabic because there's no place else you're going to talk about, let's say, for example, a vice. You're not going to talk about that at home. You're not going to talk about that in your academic classes. You may or may not talk about that walking down the street, who knows? However, you will talk about it here. And that constant reinforcement of expanding the knowledge base becomes just such a selling point for students. Look at this, very nice. Understanding that everyone has different learning styles to share with their supervisors. Lovely, lovely, thank you. That's right, Orville, you can tell him I said that. We've got some great ideas here. Samples for the students for when they complete sheets and creating their own logs. That's beautiful. Absolutely, absolutely. Great, great. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you all so much. Anybody want to shout anything out?
I was going to say, Donna made a great point in saying that employers may also agree to join in on meetings related to this. And you'll definitely get access to the deck, so you can feel free to adjust it as you feel necessary. And you can even use this to, so I know there are some schools that do employer orientation and may want to pull some of these elements into their employer orientation guide. That's cool too. Like at the end of the day, I know the TCACs, the way they utilize this is that this is actually a presentation that is shared with businesses. So I definitely think that some of this information, whatever you feel is relevant to your employer and representative of your students' lived experiences, I would definitely say share this.
Absolutely.
Anything else? Folks can unmute themselves, drop anything else in the chat.
You're welcome. Thank you, Donna. With this interaction, it's just so lovely because we have so many experts on the call, and each school and community served is unique. So we really do appreciate that.
Before we move on to the last slide, I do want to say, because I completely failed to bring it up earlier, it is embedded in the presentation, but I just want to reiterate that the CTE team has developed an amazing resource that really goes through, and I'm going to drop it into the chat again. And it's actually, they're going to be talking about it next week, if I'm not mistaken. But they developed this great WBL scope and sequence map that literally also includes, and by activity, so not only thinking about internships or work-based learning partners, but thinking about other opportunities like a career day or a guest speaker and mentoring. And I dropped it into the chat. I'm almost positive I embedded it throughout the presentation, but just dropping it into the chat, it also has an uplift consideration for Ls and considerations for students with IEPs. So I would say check that out as well on when you have an opportunity. I'm sure this is not new to you as a resource, but definitely something that I wanted to uplift in this space.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So we just want to touch on managing the work-based learning relationship. In the slide, there's a resource for what one will call disability etiquette. So when we're thinking about the employers talking to the students, if you could click that one more time, Larry, that would be fantastic. Two more times. Thank you so much. I have to take out these animations, but thank you, thank you. So if you, rather than asking a student who's engaging in a work-based learning process, having the workplace person say, hey, do you have a disability? Are you an English language learner? They wouldn't say that to one of their regular employees, but they can say, what are your strengths in the workplace? And how can I help you utilize those strengths? And that may prompt the student to engage in their self-advocacy and disability disclosure, or it may not, and that's also okay, but it opens up those lines of communication. If employers are thinking, well, you know, they really can't do that because of their disability, or they can't do that because they really don't speak English, the question to ask would be, what supports can I provide you so you can be successful at this job? What can I give you? And that, again, could open up the conversation, or it could say to the student that, you know what, now's the time for disability disclosure or looking for help with different aspects of the job. And then if you're thinking like, I should talk to a friend or a coworker to get advice about their disability, they can always come to the TCAC offices. If the work-based learning coordinators, we know you're doing everything and then some. So if you need the TCAC to lean in and provide some support, we're there for you. We're in every borough, and we have our catalog and our contact information in the resource folder for you. So we just want to support you in developing and helping the employers develop language that can get to the objective of productivity in the workplace without getting people in trouble and without creating uncomfortable situations for our student learners. Next slide, please. So anybody who would like to take a moment and shout out a question or type a question in the chat, you're more than welcome to. That would be lovely. Okay, Maureen, great. Yep, we're all good. There you go. The students increasing those relationships, because everything is about relationship. I like the idea, Jay, of the conference call and giving the opportunities for all parties to share their concerns before they start the experience. That is fantastic. And Donna, having those employers join those calls and just opening up lines of communication. That's a great thing. Absolutely. Lovely. Looking through the chat, scanning. Anyone who wants to unmute themselves, if you'd like to shout out something, please feel free. Now is the time. But we've got a lot of good things in here, Yesenia, about what the schools are going to do and how they can implement some of these strategies very quickly within their buildings. This chat box is very rich. Yes.
Yeah, I definitely, if there's any questions, concerns, feedback, or needs that you may have that, we may not have addressed yet around supporting diverse learners, and it may not be you as an educator how to support the diverse learner. It may be how to communicate that effectively to your partners. That's okay too. And if not, there are no questions, that's okay too. And I think it'll give us an opportunity to talk a little bit more about some of the other opportunities that we have throughout our division as well. So I think I'll give 30 seconds before moving on.
Sounds good.
Question. Sorry, I have a quick question.
Great, Donna, go right ahead.
My question is, I didn't even realize I was not on video, sorry. My question is, these slides are available online, right?
There will be in a folder, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
in the resource folder,
Okay.
you'll have these slides and you'll be able to access all the live links that we've put in here for you.
Okay, good, because then I will share it with my CTE coordinator.
Lovely. Get the word out. That's fantastic. We appreciate that. We took time to curate what we felt, because your time is extremely limited. You don't have the time to do the research and all that. So we've kind of done this piece for you, and it warms my heart to hear that more and more people will be exposed to the information over time. That is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, next slide. So with that, we just wanted to, so again, the Division of Multilingual Learners just wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that we're doing. Again, my role is I serve as the Director of Career Readiness, and my main role is to really help increase access to ELLs, to CTE programming and work-based learning. So I am here for individual consultations, for group sessions, for anything that you may need, whether it's just a thought partner to have a conversation with, but I wanted to share kind of some of our work, and you'll again have access to this, and I will be sure that I embed all the links for especially our resource development pieces. But just wanting to think about our division as a whole, we focus on, I'm the career arm, but we also have a college arm. So we focus on the post-secondary readiness process as a whole for English language learners, and just wanted to show how we divide our work, which is around capacity building, partnership development, and then thinking about the resource development piece. If there are resources that you feel that you need as a CTE teacher that to support your Ls that you don't have, or work-based learning coordinator, like that, really, I would love to hear from you and figure out how our office or our division rather can support you through that as well. But this is just a variety of the different resources that we do currently have. We have currently, which is hyperlinked here, our community chats, which are open to all school counselors, all school CTE teachers, work-based learning coordinators, CBOs, anyone and anyone who wants to support English language learners through the post-secondary readiness process. And we have one of them already passed, but we had 2 upcoming student opportunities, which we normally do not, it's not been a norm. It's been something that we started doing as a result of COVID and a need of the field. But we did host a multilingual career connections last month, which really focused on resume building workshop, as well as career panels in various languages. So we will be sharing out the recordings and those resources soon. And in the spring semester, we will be during April break, we will have a Global Ready Academy, which will focus on self-exploration and college and career readiness. And then, of course, these are some of our partners that we work with, both internally and externally. Just a quick snapshot, we have many more. And you'll have an opportunity to go through some of our resources that we have. All of our resources are available in all DOE languages. So if a student wants to engage in that resource in their home language or in English or in both, like my interns completed a career exploration workbook in their home language, but read the English version at the same time. It was a great opportunity they felt for them to be able to practice their English in a conversational space and in a safe way. So thinking about the various tools that you may want to leverage. Next slide.
And these are your Transition and College Access Center points. We have offices throughout the city. So if your school is in Brooklyn, you'd be connecting with my colleague, Victoria in Brooklyn. If your school's in the Bronx, you'd be connecting with Akil. So we have an office in each borough, and the services that we provide are delivered through the boroughs, and we're happy to work with you with your CTE needs for our students with disabilities. And those are all live links, so you can reach out to them directly. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Larry, but just wanted to reinforce that the resources are going to get sent out tomorrow, probably late afternoon, inclusive of the recording, as well as the slides and any other documents that are included in the folder. And all of the people who registered for this session will have access to those. So I'm going to hand it over to Larry.
Thanks, Takia. So, and I'm going to ask you, Takia, if you can just drop the link to the exit survey into the chat box. I'm going to start from the bottom, but just wanted to make sure before everyone leaves, if you can please fill out the exit survey. Very important that we hear from you, your feedback on how we can make these presentations better. As Takia mentioned, and as Audrey mentioned earlier, all of the resources and this recording will be in the resource folder made available to you in Takia's upcoming email. And please check our WBL Institute calendar. The link is on the top for all the offerings that we have until the end of March. And on behalf of myself, Takia, Audrey, and Yesenia, we've come to a close, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Great responses in the chat. Thank you so much.